Okay, this is episode 4 of League's Next World Champion, hosted by me, Thorin, usual co-host, Emily Rand, and as always, sponsored by Esports Pools, where if you're going to play fantasy contests, I know it's tempting to think to yourself, right, SK Telecom, they're going to turn it around at some point in time. They've got some good players here. If you're playing a fantasy contest, I'd stay the fuck away from any SK Telecom players because at the moment, they can lose to anyone. And I mean anyone. And at the moment, if they beat someone, sometimes you're like, whew, that was close. So let's start the episode with the topic of SK Telecom, Emily, because obviously, at the moment, they're not one of the top teams in LCK, and they're having all sorts of problems, and there's a lot of things they're trying to change, and admittedly, fair play, they are trying different solutions out, but they are still the big name, and in a weird way, the problems they're having actually kind of dominate the storyline of the league at the moment, so we have to talk about them. So, obviously, right, SKT lost to MVP. Remember, MVP, along with Kongdu, is supposed to be one of the worst teams in the league. Then they lost to Afreeca Freecs. Okay, fair play. I actually think Afreeca Freecs, week on week, showing themselves to be pretty good. Then they narrowly beat BBQ Olivers. Now listen, BBQ Olivers, they're a pretty good upset team. Actually, I've seen them keep winning maps off people, but certainly they're not going to be winning LCK or deep in the playoffs. Right? Bearing in mind, SKT plays KSV later this week. This really could be a 2-week span where SKT goes 1-3, right?
Yeah, they just broke their 5-game loss streak last night. And
let me just actually double check. So, okay, the other teams they'd lost to. Okay, KT, fair enough. Kingzone, fair enough. Okay, so at least the other 2 games that they'd lost were like legit teams. And then before that was Jin Air. So, a couple of really good teams in that run, but these other ones are a bit unacceptable, right?
Yeah, I mean, and for the BBQ series to be as close as it was with that second game going, 75 minutes, 74 minutes, 75 minutes. They tried out their new jungler, which I always think is interesting because there's a clear difference between when you're trialing out someone like Wolf in the jungle position, which they did for the first 2 weeks, right? And then when you're bringing in someone who is legitimately a solo queue jungler that you picked up to jungle, not an experienced player who's stepping into the jungle role, who is scrimmed jungle with the team, but that's not their first role. It's an off role still. Because Blossom, it's a completely different look, right? So he's coming at it from a more aggressive perspective as a solo queue jungler, and he goes up against Bono, who BBQ have been trialing since Twch has had some communication issues with the BBQ lanes. So this is a really interesting matchup for me. I kind of wonder, based on what they did with Wolf previously and what they did with Blank when they did send Blank out against those better teams. I do wonder if it had been like a better team if they would have tested out Blossom, because it's still like, if you're going up against a really experienced jungler, it might have been more difficult for him. I mean, it's a jungler with 1 competitive series under his belt versus the debut of a rookie. So, but he looked a lot different than he wasn't passive. He was very aggressive, for better, for worse, as we saw across the entire span of the series. He had similar issues to when you start a new jungler, where if your lanes are losing or if you suddenly fall behind, he didn't necessarily know where to be.
Sure.
He had these really weird aggressive mispositionings, but overall, like, I do feel that you did at least sense that there's a breath of fresh air, which is good for them. The team itself still did not look
Well, they have,
good.
Let's put it this way, they have more problems than just the jungler, which is something obviously we have outlined. Okay, so let me ask this then. First of all, I'm kind of with you on the fact that it's actually weird to me that they waited this long to try it. Like, I can't believe their first move was like, go to Wolf jungle, and then when that doesn't work, go back to Blank, and then just make Blank play every game. And then it's only seemingly when they got to like pure desperation that they were like, how about let's try out this guy who actually apparently has some talent and hasn't played yet. And as you're saying here, yeah, even in the games he didn't win, it looked good, it looked promising. And also, I mean, this if anything, okay, this narrative right now sums up how desperate it is for SK Telecom. They need their rookie jungler to do the fucking Will of the Bee move and win them series against teams that they should never be losing to in the first place. This isn't like, when they used to do the will of the bee to win against the top teams. They're having to pull it out against the mid-tier teams. So what other problems aside from jungle can you see for SK Telecom? I mean, for a start off, top side of the map still a problem, right?
Yeah. I think, so...
Is there improvement coming, though?
Yeah, I think what you see now is because they've primarily focused on Tall, he's played... let me double check here. He's played the vast majority of their series, aside from the one against Afreeca. So, he's improving in steady increments. And that's the thing. Like, if you do give a player time, he has steadily improved with the team. He's looked slightly better. He's still not up to where I think even Huni was last year, because he was a downgrade from what Huni was. And then Untara only played the one series, which they lost. So I do think that it seems like they're putting their hopes on Tall, which I don't mind, because once you get outside of the mindset of we must win everything, right? And I think that's a good mindset to have. But in terms of putting pressure on the team of SK Telecom, previously when they felt pressure to win everything, they do these minor substitutions to just kind of plug the holes, right? You plug your finger in this leak, and then you plug your finger in this leak, and then eventually that just was not working anymore. So now you see, I think, a concerted effort to actually take a look at some of the younger talent they've picked up, or the newer talent they've picked up, because Tall has played before, he's not a rookie. And take a look at, maybe we can just give them time to grow and accept the fact that we're going to be a mid to bottom tier team for a little bit but the long-term payoff will be better. So I'm wondering if that's kind of the mindset that they're starting to have, just based on the fact that they did start Blossom. They have focused more on Tall, who has looked more in sync with the team. He's still going to have issues going up against the top tier top laners in the region, but it's a start, right? I like the fact that they're finally seemingly focused on looking at some of the newer talent on the team, rather than just being we're going to put Untara here because he's good enough, but he's not necessarily going to be anywhere close to the best top laner in the league. It's just that he's good enough so we can sit him there and he'll be okay. And then when he wasn't okay, that's when they're finally now starting to look at Tall, and I like the Blossom move too. So, I hope going forward, that's the attitude they go with instead of what they've done previously.
It feels a bit one thing I'm a bit concerned about is, as you say, their approach basically, it's actually somewhat reminiscent of past seasons where they've had their struggles, but they've overcome them generally, and still been very good, is that when they had problems before, they really did have kind of that Band-Aid fix approach of right, well, let's just kind of keep, we play SK Telecom style, they had that mentality, and so your job is to sort of be a not as bad version of someone else that you're just replacing, and it was kind of that way, they did kind of shoehorn people into certain roles and the way you had to play. So that clearly, to me, this split just doesn't work. It's not even just that these players are worse. They are to some degree. It's that even the style looks terrible. One thing that actually really worried me is they would have lost against MVP if Faker hadn't have just had that carry game on Kassadin.
Against BBQ? Yeah.
Was it against BBQ? I thought it was against MVP.
They lost to MVP. Faker carried on Kassadin last night.
Yeah, I think they had... Oh, yes, I think you're right. So, but the point is, in that kind of a scenario, so far this season, Faker has been playing like someone who thought we're just going to plug the holes. Right, let me just be the best version of a mid who plays just all the meta champs, and I play whatever you need. You need Azir this game, you need Galio, right? Okay, I'll just do that. Having to play Kassadin and go ham, I think at some point that's almost something you have to do if you're SK Telecom. At this point in time, to go the other way, instead of plugging their leaks, you've got to kind of actually load up the few strengths you've got and just try and win the game off that. You basically, what I'm kind of saying is, SK Telecom at the moment actually has become one of those mid-tier LCK teams who has the one superstar player, and you have to go, right, we've got Teddy, or we've got in the past, fucking Frozen or something. We have to go all in on this guy. And if we win, we win. And if we don't, well, we're never going to out macro the top teams because we're a mid-tier team. I kind of feel like that's where they're at right now. The desperation really is kind of set in.
Yeah. And I mean, one thing I will say is that I feel like Bang has been criticized a lot, but like I talked about last week, I do think part of it is that SKT has just looked so disjointed that he hasn't been able to really shine in team fights. So I'm kind of hoping if they just focus on playing around Faker and bringing their younger players up to speed, that also will happen, right? Because previously we just had Faker was making these like awful mistakes that you would never think he would make. And I don't know if it was a communication issue or he just felt this immense amount of pressure to be the carry and that was getting to him and everything else is falling around him. But going forward, that's what I would like to see from SKT, because I also think it will help players, like it'll help the newer players, but then it'll also help a player like Bang who, he's not known for his like super lane dominance. He's known for his really strong team fighting. And if you take that away from him, he's still playing fine, but people are going to perceive it as him playing worse. You're never going to
see him at his strengths.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, but what about the return of Wolf then? Like, I mean, this is another example where they're just messing around with every role except Bang and Faker, basically. So, from what you saw of Wolf's return, should they have just stuck with effort? Does it make sense to bring him back in?
I mean, I think so. Wolf is always one of those horrible players to analyze, because I think what the team sees his role as is something intangible that I can't say definitively one way or the other. Like, Wolf is a really good influence on the team. He's a really good player to have on a team, which is what the players themselves have said, right? So I can only go off of what they say. But in terms of being back in the game, I think he's been fine. I think if you're going to be trying out Tall and Blossom as your like new top side, playing Wolf actually makes a little bit more sense, just because he does have a lot of experience with SKT's comms, right? So so I don't actually think that is a poor decision, although I wouldn't mind seeing effort. But I do think because they've decided to say, okay, or their most recent decisions tell me, okay, we're going to actually focus on topside, and we're going to let these players, improve and they're going to make mistakes, but we're going to keep them in anyway, right? That is where Wolf does rise in value, because he has so much experience, because he's been in these comms for so long, that I think that raises his value up a lot more, as opposed to someone like Effort, who, I mean, Effort was fine, right? Like, his mistakes were basic rookie mistakes. Like, they were basic, like, mispositioning mistakes, which any new player would make. Like, he had some really good plays and he had some really terrible plays. And because SKT as a whole was struggling, they were magnified a lot more. Like, that one mistake that he makes on Braum, where he just kind of gets caught out, like, that suddenly means a lot more when the team just sweeps in and then crushes SKT afterwards, because they were already behind. So I think that it makes a lot more sense that they're starting Wolf, since it looks like they are going to be focusing on their newer players topside.
So in case someone hasn't followed LCK, they might think to themselves naively, because MVP won this game, oh, is MVP like a mid-tier team? Are they an upset team? No. MVP had not won a single game until they won this series against SK Telecom, right? Did MVP show you something different in the series?
I mean, I think so. Starting with their series against KSV, where I believe that was the Rek'Sai performance with Beyond. I think what MVP can have is an okay early game. But no, I still don't think that MVP are a particularly strong team at all. In fact, with SKT focusing a little bit more on their newer players and beating BBQ, I would put them back under at the very bottom still. I don't think we're going to see this like meteoric rise where MVP suddenly out of nowhere just like shoots up the rankings. I think that they're kind of, with that set of players, they've reached the pinnacle of what they can do last year, it looks like. So I do think Beyond still has some occasionally really good early games. I think Max sometimes has these really great initiation performances coming out of bot lane with like tankier initiating supports. But in terms of the entire team as a whole, they're still pretty rough.
Okay, so then since you've mentioned KSV, let's talk about KSV, because the bizarre thing with this team is, right, okay, if I say to people KSV lost another series and it wasn't against the top team, they're going to think, right, okay, who was it then? Was it a Jin Air? Was it Afreeca? No. They barely beat BBQ, and then they lost to Rox Tigers. Now, Rox Tigers, again, don't be confused by the name. This is like an okay team, but they're very firmly like a mid to bottom half of the table team, and I personally wouldn't expect to see them in the playoffs. You know, there's a lot better teams and teams that even have more promise. What's going wrong for KSV? Because they have had times during the split where things have looked good, and then now they're having these results that these really shouldn't be happening for a team that, in theory, remember, you always have to say this, haven't changed players, have still got the same exact core.
So KSV has a early game and a late game issue. And it's that around their jungle position, if they play Haru, who I actually think has even improved from last year, despite the fact that he's not like stomping people.
Yes.
If they play Haru, he's very smart in the early game, and KSV is a smart team. And they can play around him early, and then when they get to these mid to late game neutral objective setups, that's when the team starts to have issues. With Ambition is, I still rate him fairly highly as a jungler, but he has a very specific style where he is going to farm up early, and that's going to leave him open to aggression from opponents, especially. So if you look at the way BBQ attacked KSV, and honestly, let's be real, they should have won that series. And then even earlier that week so Beyond attacked them with Rek'Sai really well early. And then BBQ used a lot of TP spellbook, like summoner spell swapping, to just be everywhere on the map. So they just kept KSV kind of like running after them, and you never know how many players are going to appear. And so Rox took a look at that, and they were like, well, we can do that. Like we can bring out that game plan. And for game one, that's exactly what they did. And then you saw them calm down a bit in the last game, where they just had a really strong like kind of siege poke composition, and they continue to play around Linderong, who I'm no longer surprised they're playing around him because he's improved a lot. So again, it's a bit surprising that it worked against KSB, because I still rate Cuvée pretty highly. But
listen, obviously, whenever you're criticizing a top laner, you have to take into the context of what's going on in his jungle position. And obviously, jungle was the first thing you raised here. Do you think that there are issues for Cuvée at the moment when he goes in these top lane matches with the different junglers he's using?
I think he's a little bit shakier with Haru, but just because Haru is a little bit more volatile of a jungler. But I think Cuvée is playing, so like, you know how I said Crown is playing slightly better than where he was at? He's still not playing anywhere near what we've seen from him. I mean, Victor's coming back, so maybe when we get to 8.3, Crown will just suddenly, become a god again, because he'll just spam Victor. But until then, he's been really shaky, and that just destabilizes the middle of the map sometimes, especially if he's not like, so in game 3, he played Taliyah, but unlike previous Taliyah games where he's been able to affect the side lanes really well, because he's still, again, like, if he's losing lane, he's still a really smart player. And he knows how to affect side lanes and, kind of control the map that way if he can't control mid. But we saw he wasn't able to affect the side lanes as well either, and Haru was exploited in the jungler. It's like his first loss on Rengar in a really long time. That was like his kind of shining go-to champion. So I think the thing with KSV is that they if they play Ambition, they have problems early, but they can always win in late game team fights because they're a neutral objective setup and their team fighting is very good. When they play with Haru, they're not exploited early, but they then lose that steadier shot calling towards the end of the game, like towards the mid to late game. So basically, if you could find a way to like fuse Haru and Ambition together and make one jungler, KSV would suddenly be like one of the best teams in Korea again.
Yes.
But they don't have that, and they haven't found a way to figure that out.
You basically need a jungle Archon. You need to get the High Templar of Ambition and the Dark Templar of Haru and
or like you can
them into,
do a mid-game substitution, gets to like 20 minutes. They're like, okay, like coach throws out a flag and they're like, all right, we're going to substitute Ambition in now. And
okay, so
he's going to take over all of Haru's stuff, but then we're going to play.
The bizarre thing about it, though, is that the approach they're taking right now is actually, I thought they would go the other way around. The traditional Korean way is the other way. What you do is you start with someone like Haru, the younger player, the more inexperienced one. Then when he fucks up, you bring in the other guy and think, right, this guy's going to close out the series. He's going to hopefully figure out what was going wrong, diagnose it. They're doing it the opposite way, though. They always start Ambition, lose game one, then in comes Haru. Now, the problem with this scenario is you want to think to yourself, logically, right, well, KSV obviously traditionally a late game team. Just stick with Ambition, figure out your problems. But they're losing all the games with him. Then you look at the Haru scenario. Okay, you're right. Yeah, they always get the advantages. Obviously, he plays totally different champions. He can play all these aggressive champions.
Yeah.
But the problem is, in the current meta, I mean, good luck finishing a game in 20 minutes. So they really are kind of fucked, right? They're just stuck between two decisions that are both right and wrong at the same time. I don't really see which way you go on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think they see, so based on some things they did last year and then this year, it seems like they definitely think Haru is the future, as if like, if we can get him to just have, because a lot of that stuff just comes with experience and seeing more games, right? So I think one thing that KSV seems to reiterate through what they've been doing with Haru and Ambition this split thus far is that they definitely see Haru as the future of the team. And they see Ambition as someone who's going to slowly, like, hopefully pass off that kind of knowledge to Haru. And I will say that Haru's mid to late game is not, like, Samsung doesn't look as lost. Like, it's a slow process, right? So I think KSV is looking towards Haru as the future rather than Ambition, even though Ambition's obviously like still the star experienced player that, you know, he's been with the team for a while and he's been playing for forever. I still think that it just really seems like KSV knows what they have with Ambition, and it's up to a point, right? So especially in certain metas. So I think they definitely see Haru as the future of the team. So I wouldn't be surprised if you continue to see this. Like you continue to see maybe Ambition game one and then Haru coming in.
Okay, so since we addressed the BBQ Olivers, right, what do you make of this team? Because as you said, I mean, yeah, I actually thought they were going to beat KSV. I thought they were going to somehow pull it out. Right, here's the thing. On some level, as like a team trying to win games in League of Legends, they are good. Like they've won quite a lot of games, but they're not really that good over a series. So what are the flaws? What's going on here? Because as you mentioned, like they've already switched out the jungler at times. What do you make of this team overall?
I thought the Bono switch was interesting because I think what they were thinking of Twch is that he was a little bit too slow in the early game, and he also seemed to have a few communication issues with lanes just based on where he'd position and some of his ganks. So my assumption is that they were trialing Bono and Scrims, and he came out and he actually did pretty well. And then his second series was against Blossom, where like both of them are new, right? So as soon as one falls behind, then like they're like, oh god, what do I do? And then it's up to the rest of the team. And the thing with BBQ is I don't think that team has figured out what they really want to do, and they have a lot of options. Like I said, they were playing like a lot of teams I've seen in China where they're playing around TP Spellbook, where like you have so many people coming in attacking from all sides, and you have Ignar on Blitzcrank, and he's everywhere on the map and just pulling people. And that was definitely a strategy that caught KSV off guard. I think they can play around that, but then when Trick comes in, that changes the dynamic of the team because they will play at a slower pace. So I think a lot of it is that they just they haven't really figured out what their team identity is necessarily. And because they have all of these options, I think they're being pulled in more than a few different directions. And it is kind of sad because a lot of their losses are like this close. Like they could easily be like a 500 team or better, if they hadn't made like some very obvious, macro mistakes in the late game. So, I'm not really sure where this team is going because I don't really think they themselves have figured out what their identity is. At least that's what substituting Bono in tells me, because with Bono you can have Ignar maybe be a little bit more aggressive, but then their map play decreases and they're a little bit more like all over the place, I guess. I think picking up the TP Spellbook idea was really good for them because I think it plays to a few of the strengths that they do have. But right now, BBQ is actually really frustrating. A frustrating team for me to watch.
Put it this way, yeah, like you say, for a team that's only won 2 series out of the 7 they've played, like I actually do think when I saw some of these games and some of how many times they've gotten to game 3, this team could be ahead of like a Jin Air, Rockstar. All these teams but they could actually be like the team of that pack that's up there with. I mean, they're not going to be the Afreeca Freecs level, but just below that level, they could be like the ones that are just on the outside looking in. And instead, they're in this terrible spot where, yeah, it's just a bit bizarre. Okay, so, by the way, just a general sidebar. This is the most fucking nuts LCK/OGN series league we have ever seen. I mean, remember, the only team at the moment that's doing utterly terribly is MVP.
MVP, right? Yeah.
And they just beat KSV. Then you have like Kongdu, also not a very good team, also beat KSV. Then you have Telecom, bizarrely that far down. And basically, once you get to everyone except MVP, everyone's winning games. Everyone's getting the game 3s. Everyone's getting weird upsets it's like they're getting different ones. Like I get to beat a KT, right? You get to beat KSV. Someone else gets to beat whoever it might be. Basically, everyone except Kingzone DragonX has to be scared almost every week they play. So it's nuts, isn't it?
Yeah, I actually really, really like it. Like even a team, like previously you would look at teams like Kongdu or like BBQ previously, and you'd be like, oh, we might be able to try out something new against this team, or we might not be able to, we might be able to try a comp that we've wanted to try out and stuff like that. I mean, KT is kind of famous for doing this, for underestimating their opponents, but I think you can't do that in this league anymore. Like even Kongdu, if they get the comp that they really want to run with like these strong, simple team fighting comps around like a Galio or Zac, like they can beat you. So I mean, I'm actually really enjoying this split because it seems really wide open, as compared to splits previous where you had like a very clear cut stratification of like this team can beat this team but they can't beat this team. So they're not going to be higher than like third, or they're not going to be higher than fourth, etc. So I still I expected by this episode to be able to be like, okay, so here's how we have Korea, and right now I still have no idea outside of Kingzone. So,
well, the other funny thing as well is there's even like a lot. Like I realize, yes, the meta clearly is affecting it, but I even think there's a logic to it because when you look at the rosters, right, LCK right now, this is why I often wonder actually what the financial situation in Korea is really like. Like, for example, everyone knows that Faker has this huge salary. I mean, if you look at some of the moves they've made the last few years, I would suspect they actually don't pay mega bucks to a lot of the other players, and that's also one of the reasons why they don't try to pick up huge name signings and why they don't have that many huge name signings. I suspect they were getting a lot of those names because people just wanted to win the World Championship and win LCK, There's people kind of willing to take a cut. Because if you look at the LCK right now, you would believe this was like an American sports league that had like a salary cap or something. So, you know, when you have salary caps, every team gets a star player and then everyone gets sort of like another. And yeah, okay, coaching and having a really good GM can get you the super team and get you the best squad. But by default, you don't just get it for being one team. It looks like that at the moment. Every team has like a lane or two that can do something in these games. You know, we actually have these teams where, funnily enough, okay, are you ready for the ultimate iniquity? Are you ready for the true blasphemy? The LCK right now is like LPL, because LPL always puzzled me in that you would always have these like bottom 4 or 5 teams where they would win games, like upset people, not consistently, but they would upset like way more than they should. And then whenever you looked at the roster, that alone could tell you why that happened. Half the time it was because, you know, China bizarrely never liked to have top lane carries in the best teams. So all that would happen was you had to just get the right LPL team that had like a really sick top lane carry, but no one else.
And then they beat EDG.
If you just got the right champion, he could win the game against anyone. Yeah. So LCK reminds me of that. It's fun. I agree with you, because every team has a win condition in a weird way.
Yeah, LPL is the same way, actually. They have a lot of really interesting teams right now. But, I mean, I think, so you have a team like Jin Air, right, where they know, like, Jin Air knows where their bread is buttered. They're going to play around Teddy. And then you have a team like BBQ that we just talked about that, in my opinion, is kind of being torn in different directions, because there are a bunch of different ways that they can play. Yes. And then you have Rox, who discovered that Linderong is actually good this split. So they're like, okay, well, you know, we're gonna start playing through topside. And obviously there were some hiccups with that, because if you watch, you know, Songyun's poor game on Kog'Maw game 1 against KT, where like all they do is keep ulting like tanky score and everyone abandons Songyun, and Songyun's just like getting DPS'd immediately in team fights. So you can kind of see the push and pull where Rox Tigers are trying to figure out like, oh, so, you know, we're still playing through topside, but we still have to protect our AD carry. And you can see the learning process, which I always find really interesting. So there's a lot of really weird teams in the middle of the pack. And I think the only one who's really managed to distinguish themselves is Afreeca, actually. Yes. I do think they are better than the cluster of like Rox, Jin Air, BBQ, and then like slightly below you have SKT trying to figure stuff out, and Kongdu.
Okay, well, let's talk about Afreeca then, because I have to say, like, I again, to differentiate them from the past seasons when they had those teams, those were just teams that like had nice upset potential. They were the team that, you know, with like, they'll make playoffs, but they're going to go out in the first round, and they maybe can get a few best of threes here and there if like a Marin or someone plays super ham. This season, they are the most exciting, aside from Kingzone DragonX, who obviously are the clear best team. Afreeca Freecs is the most exciting team in the LCK. And I have to say, one of the crazy things, and one of the reasons why it's logical, again, just from the roster, as to why they are bucking the trend of what you said before, where, you know, they have kind of separated themselves from the pack, especially when you look at the quality of their wins, is because they actually have, top to bottom, a really good roster this split. They actually look like one of the strongest teams, you know, every position. They don't really have a weakness, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, Kuro, you know exactly what you're going to get, right?
And he's actually playing very well.
Yeah, he's, I think, still at the top of the MVP standings. But they play around his pressure really well. And most importantly, he still does it without, like, Kuro's thing has always been wave clear while being efficient and not needing jungle attention. And that is actually invaluable right now, because amazing, I think people really underestimate how much having pushing lanes, just ask Team WE, who tilts me every week with their draft, pushing lanes mean a lot. And if you can have a mid laner like Kuro, who's just going to sit there and wave clear and not be a liability and not need help, then it frees up Spirit to either carry, like we saw the carry Jungle Jax game. We've seen him be Jungle Camille, which, like, if you saw Score play Jungle Camille, it's like night and day between the two of them. And then you can also have Kuro pop off on LeBlanc if he wants to, or you can have Keen playing Camille. You can flex that. You can have Keen playing a carry, like a scaling carry, like a Gangplank. And then Kramer, obviously, you know, like I said last year, he stepped up a lot where he became less of a liability and more like a legitimate carry that you can actually funnel resources into. So it's really interesting because they can play a bunch of different ways, but I feel like they're not having the same problem that BBQ are having, where they're like, okay, we're going to go into this game and this is our game plan. And that's something that's carried over from last year, I think, where you would see it only in game one, but they'd come in and they'd be like, okay, we're going to play this way. We're going to have this draft and this is how we're going to win. And they had very clear cut idea and identity for that one game of how they were going to beat their opponent. And I feel like that has carried over into this more flexible team now. And so it's very interesting to watch.
Well, put it this way. I mean, as you said when you were describing Kuro there, like, I'm no joke, if I could pick one player to fix Kingzone Rolster right now, I wouldn't put Faker on the team. I would put Kuro on the team. I think that would literally be the dream. Like, from watching him in Rocks Tigers, obviously the old versions, and now seeing him in this Afreeca Freecs, that guy is like the top laner's dream mid laner, because since he doesn't need the jungler at all, the jungler's all yours. If you're a sick top laner, great. You've got all the attention you need, all the help you need. It's one of those things where it's because he looked so shaky earlier in his career. Everyone's been on that kind of like weird perspective of like, wow, he's doing so good considering I thought he was bad. And it's like, actually, yes, players like that, okay, they probably wouldn't be good if you gave them all the attention and made them the superstar player. They probably wouldn't. It's not their mentality, you know? But in his own little niche, in his own little like aspect he's carved out, he's the best. He's the best at what he does.
Yeah, he's actually, if you want to look at how mid lane has evolved as a position, Kuro is actually like one of the players you should really just focus on. I think the other thing that's really interesting, to bring it back to the BBQ comparison, yes, they also have Twch, who, like, if you know him from previous years on Incredible Miracle, he was the one that picked out the weird support picks, right? Like, he was kind of known like Max is now. But he is someone who has a really good initiation sense and is really good with CC and Peel. And that is also starting to show this split as well. But again, unlike BBQ, who has Ignar, who occupies kind of a very similar role, right? I feel like they, again, just know, they come up with these comps and they know how to play to them, which is like a perfect... It's kind of the perfect marriage of what you saw glimpses of brilliance from them last year with, like, and I don't mean this as a slight against Marin, because I think Marin draws more top lane pressure than probably most, if not any, top laner. Like, you have to pay attention to him. He cannot be ignored. But because Keen is not Marin, it just frees up a lot of other things for this team, and they don't seem to be discouraged by that. They actually seem encouraged by it, which is, again, like, it's really fun to watch, because you could see this team theoretically coming up with a game plan for Kingzone and maybe taking a game, maybe taking a series, like trying to push them. I don't know, maybe that's a little too optimistic for me, but I don't know. I really like this Freecs team a lot.
Well, that you've kind of outlined there, the one downer about the Freecs lineup is that, okay, first of all, as it stands right now, aside from Kingzone DragonX, they're better than all the rest of the teams. I know they're like tied in score with some of them, but like, again, you have to look who you've played and you have to watch those head-to-heads, you know. But if the playoffs started tomorrow, I think they would play in the final against Kingzone DragonX. The problem there is, can they actually beat Kingzone DragonX? Because Kingzone DragonX also, it looks fantastic top to bottom, as in a really amazing team. And if anything, look like they're just a sick counter to anything Afreeca's got.
Yeah, I mean, they played them week 2, and obviously that didn't go well. I don't think, as they are, they can beat Kingzone at all.
It would still be amazing for a team like this to make finals, though. That would be really crazy.
I think they'd be able to maybe take a game, because, again, like, this team, their coaching staff seems really good about coming up with these specific compositions for them to run and these specific game plan ideas. Like, even if they don't necessarily have a clear-cut identity across all their games, I feel like they do load up into game knowing what they want to do. And that's something that Kingzone also has, with a more cohesive team. So I still think that Kingzone would end up beating them, but especially as they are right now. But I want to see this Freecs team improve, because I definitely don't think we've seen the best of what this team can do. And I also keep going to back to that KSV game and just crying a little inside, because they really should have had that series 2-0.
Okay, so of all the top teams, the only one we haven't gotten to is KT Rolster. And here's the thing. At the moment, I have to say, this season overall for me from KT, the way it's been underwhelming is a whole new level, because it's like they haven't really gotten much better, and the league's gotten worse, quite frankly, and they haven't really gotten much worse, and the record looks good, but this is why they remind me of the old KT to some degree. But it's like it only looks good as a number on paper. When you actually look at some of the games, you're like, these are like, you're winning so close here, and these, you know, like some of these games you should 2-0 this team. Okay, you get the 2-1, but like you almost lose the moral victory on some of these, you know. What do you make of KT at the moment? Like it's not really good enough, is it, to just cruise through but not improve, surely?
No. So last night they got crushed in game 1 against Kingzone because of like scores really ineffective on Jungle Camille, and that game just snowballed out of control very quickly. And game 2 is a lot closer. I think compared to last year, I do think Deft and Mata are playing better. I do think Pawn is playing better, even though I still think he's a weakness on the team. But the thing that's really frustrating to me about KT, and I ranted about it last week, and I'll probably rant about it every week until they change, which is probably going to be never. Like, take their series against the Rocks Tigers, right? It's very reminiscent of BBQ, where they have one game where they just kind of like goof off and make some very obvious mistakes, and then they lose the game, and then they come back and they win game 3. And in the Rock series, that was actually like, it was a narrow victory until a point in game 3 as well. And it just seems like they're kind of, you know, like we're gonna go in and we're gonna have fun, and we're still gonna, you know, try to maybe style on people, and then if it doesn't work, then they end up losing. And that might not be their attitude, but from their play, it still seems like it. Despite the fact that I do feel, again, like I think Deft and Mata are a better bot lane duo than they were last year. I also feel like they don't feel as much pressure for Deft to be like the hyper carry, right? Because that's kind of what KT had settled on by the end of last split. I feel like the team itself is trying to be more flexible. I think they've found ways for Pawn. Like, I feel like that Galio composition that they had in game 1 last night would have worked if they'd had any semblance of jungle pressure. But I did not like Score's Jungle Camille at all.
Isn't it a bit bizarre that he made that pick, though? Because for me, that's like again, you're picking that if you want to like carry jungle. Like, why? Everything else pretty much in the meta works for him. I mean, it's not necessary to go to Camille jungle, right? Yeah,
I didn't. At first, I was like, "Oh, okay, like he's probably been practicing this or whatever." Yes. But yeah, it's especially since looking at the draft, he could have gone on the Jax, and that's we've seen him perform well on that champion. It's weird because I initially thought that they were trying to flex it, but then they obviously locked in Gangplank right after. So they couldn't even do something like where, you know, Afreeca can load up and draft it, and that's a very legitimate flex pick for them, because Keen plays it and Spirit has played it really well. So it was a bizarre choice, and then I didn't like it at all. He did not have pressure. He looked like he was a bit out of sorts with Pawn. They had that one disastrous mid lane play, which basically snowballed the game in Kingzone's favor, like irrevocably. So, I mean, that's what this KT team looks like without score jungle pressure, right? So it's not a good look for them. And I mean, all you can do is look at their schedule for this week and hope that they take Kongdu seriously. Because again, like Kongdu is a team that if you give them the right comp, they can beat you, despite the fact that KT has better players in every position except maybe mid lane if you wanted to make a case for edge. But I think that Pawn is still a better player in terms of like map awareness and presence.
The thing is, what you said before about how it looks as though they like goof off, and it looks like, right, well, we styled on over, we won so easily first game, now we can just sort of fuck around a bit. Right, here's the thing, most of the time where that exists in practically any esports game, but League of Legends certainly, I don't ever think most teams ever consciously think that or say it, but I definitely think unconsciously, and especially a team like this is rife to do it. In fact, famously, obviously, this is what Matta's old Korean team, Samsung White, used to do, and part of the reason why it was likewise, they also thought, well, we have better players at every position, say you win game one heavily, obviously, it was just so much better, we can do whatever we want. And that is kind of like feeling underneath. And so, actually, it's been the way the whole time since they've had this KT Rolster lineup. Like, if you notice a lot of their series, it would always be the first game they'd be super good. That's when everything would look really sick. And then it would always be, the very next game was always the one that was super dodgy, and that's why they had all those 2-1s. So, I feel like that's just going to be their identity, unfortunately. I don't think there's a way to overcome that,
It's funny because after that game 1 against Rocks, which is just like, it's a hilarious game. Like, if you just want to watch a really funny stomp, go watch that game because it's really funny. But like, I turn from KT and Smeb stomping, and then I switch over to the LPL stream, and it's like Invictus Gaming 5-man fountain diving, and everyone dies, and the Nexus just dies to minions, and I was like, this is also KT. Like, it's like watching the same team. So I mean, yeah, I don't like when KT makes mistakes, even in games where I feel like it's very close and they're thinking a lot about their opponent. It's usually because someone is over aggressing, right? It's because they're overestimating their strength at that specific point in time, and they're not hanging back and maybe shoring up vision or waiting for their opponents to make a move because the onus is on their opponents to make the move, not them. That's where you see mistakes even in their better games. So KT said that this is going to be a new KT, and it still looks a lot like the old KT. So, I still think they'll be up there, right? Like, I think they'll still be a top 3-ish team, depending on Afreeca, but yeah.
One thing I want to get your take on is, to me, this is the team of all the ones in the league where if they do switch up the meta and you can do something more in the early game, I feel like this is the most logical team to instantly get a benefit from that. And maybe that'll help them separate, and it'll be them and Afreeca and Kingzone, because, yeah, they can, but if they get any little leads early, they can snowball these games and look super sick. And at the moment, obviously, the meta goes against that.
That's how they played last year, right? Like, when we saw them looking really, really dominant in some of these games, they draft really smart around early pushing lanes, and they just steamroll their opponents. And this was before, I think part of their drafting choices was not only playing to their strengths, but also because they realized that they still weren't communicating particularly well as a team. This is something that, again, they came out in interviews and said, so I can only go by what they say, but it looked in game, and then they came out and said, we're not communicating as well as a team, so it made sense to pick these really strong early game compositions where you just have strong laners, you have strong people if you have strong people across every position, you can play to that strength. Obviously the meta is slowly shifting up, so I think KT's first game was against Kingzone, so we'll see if they employ something like that against Kongdu Monster and try to play around the early game a bit more, because you saw them trying to do that in game 2 against Kingzone, I think, with the Rakan Kalista duo for Deft and Mata. And then Score returning to the Jax jungle for late game scaling, but also because he just has a lot of CC coming out of the jungle with that champion. So, and then Pawn on Malzahar to wave clear. Like, I think you did see KT shifting to that, and this was their first series on 8.2 was against a team that is obviously, now we know, like, very much better than they are. So, I'm looking forward to seeing what they do against Kongdu, but like if it's a 2-1 or if they lose, I won't be like super. Well, I will be shocked if they lose actually, but if they drop a game to Kongdu, I will not be surprised whatsoever.
When you look back now, if Khan hadn't been banned for that first series against KSV, this team literally might just be 14-0. Like, this is actually outrageous at this point in time, not least because he himself over the last couple of weeks, he basically is just playing anything he wants, and everything he wants works. And I even think this is a perfect example of why, like, this is an example of the difference between a super team and a team that has good players at every position. Because like I've mentioned in past episodes of other shows, super team actually is supposed to be like KT. It's supposed to be where everyone was a star on their old team, and then you try to make the team that's perfect. This is the team where no, you just gradually put the team together, and some of them emerged on this team. Now the big difference between those two concepts is exactly what you see with KT and exactly what you see with Kingzone, which is that KT sort of can get it together and vaguely make that work, but it's sort of a patchwork thing, whereas in Kingzone, the very fact, logically, if you think about it, that these players emerged together means that they work together. That otherwise they wouldn't be considered top players. And if you look at this team, they not only have amazing players, but when someone like Khan is just doing anything he wants, well, guess what? Now someone like Prey just gets literally any pick he wants all day long. Like, and that's already the best AD carry in the league. So it's just outrageous at this point in time, right?
Prey has been, so like, I know everyone's looking at Khan, but like, if you watch Prey's team fighting, it's actually like,
the dude just gets to play Ezreal every game. It's a dream,
yeah,
right?
He's just everywhere. But I think that's a really good point about Kingzone, which is kind of funny because I remember when Khan came up last year and everyone was saying that, oh man, he's been, he's different. He's been stomping in solo queue. And me, I'm like, wait, like prime Optimus Khan, like Han Labong, the guy that was split pushing for forever, and that's like all he could do. And then when he came on to Longzhu, like Kingzone, but Longzhu, and they had their first really good split, the team was like, okay, we have this strong bot lane, we have this really strong mid laner in BDD who can just, again, hold mid really well, so that Cuz's weaknesses aren't exploited. We can play around Khan's split pushing. And then gradually you saw, like, as they played around him, Khan actually, in my opinion, learned how to be a more flexible player. I still don't think he's as flexible as someone like Smeb or Cuvee.
Sure.
But I think in terms
Doesn't need
of...
to be at the moment.
Yeah. Like, but in terms of when you look at how Longzhu was targeted last year, right? Yes. I don't necessarily think you can do that again. I don't think you can target them bot side anymore and just focus on, if you have a strong top laner, they can go 1v1 with Khan and still be okay. I think the addition of Peanut, despite him and BDD's early miscommunications, they look a lot stronger now as a mid-jungle duo, which makes a huge difference. And they can, Kingzone can now play not as one note as they were last year. And it's actually super important for that team to have a bit more flexibility, even though I think they still obviously play to their strengths, which is, trying to get Khan a good matchup or lead in top lane while bot lane kind of just scales up and then team fights.
And also, now you look at it, I mean, you referenced Peanut there. If you watched Peanut's games recently, you wouldn't even know that, like, Zac and Sejuani exist in the meta, because he has winning lanes all the time, so he goes, cool, time for me to play Peanut champions, all the shit that you can carry on. It's looking amazing. This is what a night and day player from the SK Telecom, Peanut.
Well, and he also, so like last night he plays Sejuani and Zac, and he's like, okay, I'm gonna invade because I can, like I can take advantage of the Camille and the Jax early, and you saw some of these early ganks coming out for topside that like Smeb obviously didn't expect, Zac to be there that early, because typically the Zac path doesn't take you that way. So it's really nice, because watching Peanut last year, especially towards the end, I was just like, this isn't even the same jungler. Yeah. Like I was doing his jungle pathing sheets and I'm like, he hasn't ganked in like 10 minutes. Like, how is this even the same person? So that is really, I mean, for me as someone who's just a fan of interesting jungling, it's been a lot nicer to watch Peanut this split. And I think his coordination with BDD has improved, which was something that was, again, like I was looking out for from week one, and it's something that's super important for this team. Because unlike with Cuz, it's not BDD covering for Peanut. It's Peanut can do his own thing because BDD holds mid so well. So it's a lot more exploitative of the enemy jungler and taking advantage of his pushing lanes.
Okay, so obviously on the past shows, we've not only talked about Jin Air, who, as we outlined at the beginning of the season, absolutely a team that looked promising and looked like, hey, they could do something here. I mean, we obviously didn't know that it'd be so turbulent and there'd be so many teams with upsets, So I thought, they'll be on the outside of the elite teams. Maybe they can kind of prod a little bit. Okay, yeah, Teddy's been very good, but I'm kind of like, put it this way, I would be starting to sell my stock on Jin Air a little bit, because I feel like there's something about them that doesn't look like they're going to make the breakthrough,
I think with Jin Air, when I was talking about how they'd adapt to the meta shift, which is why I'm really interesting to see them. I mean, I think they'll get stomped by Kingzone, but I'm definitely curious to see them go up against Rocks, because that is another team that is still kind of trying to figure things out, but where Jin Air is playing through bot side more, Rocks is playing more through top side. But as the meta has shifted, I would like to see how Jin Air adjust, because since bot lane is more volatile now, because of the absence of the relic shield overheal crap, you can't have Teddy just scaling up until late, right? Like Jin Air can't sit back and be like, okay, we're just gonna put Teddy on a scaling hyper carry, and then he's gonna like bust out these absolutely insane Caitlyn team fights. You have a more volatile bot lane, and so I'm really curious to see how Teddy and Wraith are going to handle that, and how Jin Air are going to play around that, because Jin Air's problems aren't in bot, and they're not even in top, and MT is actually looking slightly more intelligent, which I'm going to attribute to Wraith until I'm proven otherwise. But their mid lane is a problem, and it's not because they have two like very terrible mid laners, but they have two new mid laners, and so they're just, I don't see them having as good of a control of the mid lane as a lot of these other teams that they're going to go up against. Even a team like Rocks, where I would say like maybe pound for pound, the Grace and Justice are probably more skilled mechanically than Lava. But Rocks play around getting these picks for Lava really well, where like the Corki, where he can just, wave clear. And I haven't seen, they seem to have settled on Grace in their most recent matches. But
who do you think is actually the better between the two?
I'm not sure.
Or at least better for this team. Who do you think would be the odd choice if you had to pick?
I'd probably stick with Grace. I think they've done a bit better with him.
It's not even like you've got that scenario where it's like, like at least with SKT, like I could vaguely understand the logic of why they like kept on Tara and then went with Talon. They were like, right, we're going to play different styles here, and then we're going to bring you in depending on what we want to do. These aren't even that dissimilar as players, really.
No, they're both, and I mean, they're both new too, right? Like, so Justice was a substitute, but he never played. And then Grace is Yaharong, and he was picked off of solo queue, and his first games for the team were in the Kespa Cup, where he had a good performance, and then he had a really terrible performance. So, it looks like they're slightly better with Grace, but I mean, like, I think the kind of funny thing about them going up against Rocks is that they're going up against Kuzan, but Kuzan isn't even playing its lava. So, it would have been interesting to see this team with Kuzan, who has a bit more experience and can just also again sit in mid and wave clear. So I'm definitely curious to see Jin Air on 8.2 and see if other teams will attack the mid lane position, just because you see a lot of green mistakes just in terms of lane positioning and warding and positioning yourself, at or around your jungler, just like basic mid lane stuff like that.
So actually, I had an interesting abstract question for you, which is that because there've been so many upsets and so many 3-game series all over the place between all levels of team in LCK, it's one of the few splits I've ever seen where you can't go and look at the champion stats and figure out what is OP by what's winning, because like everything's like 40 to 60% win rate. There's very little stuff that's been picked often that's even approaching 70% win rate. So is the meta actually right now, as much as people have complained, especially most recently before it got slightly started to get tweaked, that it was very stale, is it actually quite wide open, do you think?
I actually like the meta outside of, so my main issue with 8.1 was the bot lane, because that was just really boring to watch. But in terms of the rest of the map, my only issue is with mid. And even then you can bring out some different picks. We've seen like,
it's just traditionally, people can play like 8-10 champions, whereas now it's like 5-4
yeah,
champions.
I mean, the problem with having an Azir meta, so like talking to mid laners in NA, for example, because I go to NALCS, like if you have Azir in the meta, you have specific champions that kind of need to go up against Azir, or at least like need to match his ability to wave clear, because Azir's wave clear and siege is just like ridiculous. So I think that is my only slight qualm about this meta right now, is the fact that because Azir is still so powerful, you do have a set way that you have to play mid. Kuro, LeBlanc, Outlier aside, which is why you see, like, I think Corki is actually a bit stronger than people might give him credit for. Obviously Galio, we've seen rise in priority, and then even Zoe with the minion dematerializer, her wave clear is super good, and obviously she's more of a poke champ with the way she chunks people out with Paddle Star. So until those nerfs go through, which I don't even think begin to address the strength of Zoe, I think she'll still be pretty strong. So, but actually don't like outside of
Zoe though, right?
Oh yeah, because she's not, especially, and Korea took a while to pick her up because she's not the traditional, especially in an Azir meta, like she's not the traditional wave clear mid that you would think of. Yes. So I think that's why like China picked her up right away, right? Like immediate pick ban status, we're going to style on people. Yes. Whereas Korea is a lot more, how do we continue to control mid with wave clear? And until people started doing that with Zoe, I think teams were kind of a little bit more hands off with her, just because she wasn't, like, Zoe still has a lot of wave clear, don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not saying she's not a wave clear champ, but she's not traditional wave clear in the style that Korean teams tend to like overall. So, but I do think she's not going to drop off in the meta either. So anyway, my only qualms would be about mid, I think. I think the rest of the meta, like, I don't even necessarily have a huge issue with stopwatch, since you can pull off some really interesting dives with it. So. Okay.
Well, especially as it's the problem before for me as well is it was everything at the same time. It was like stopwatch, and it was relic shield, and it was all this other shit. So it's like, it was the compound problem. It wasn't one factor, Yeah. Okay, so let's do this, right? When this episode comes out, I think that actually tomorrow's games will already be played, because that's in the morning in Europe. So luckily, tomorrow's games are Afreeca Freecs versus MVP, so not an interesting game. Jin Air versus Rocks, as you alluded to before. Okay, that's vaguely interesting. That probably tells us more about Jin Air. But Of the 4 games after that, so we've got Jin Air Kingzone, we've got BBQ MVP, SK Telecom KSV, and Kongdu versus KT. Right, which of these 4 do you think will be the best matchup? Which is like the marquee matchup for you?
I'm not sure if it will be the best, but the one I'm looking at the most is definitely SKT versus KSV.
If KSV wins this game, I feel like you can just call this split for SK Telecom. Like, what hope is there left at this point?
I mean, it's rough because they'll have, what, six losses at that point.
Surely that's no playoffs possible. But I mean, at this point, they almost have to have like a 75%, 80% win rate next round anyway, right?
Yeah. I mean, that series could be really sloppy. So I'm not sure if it will be the best, but that's the one I'm looking forward to the most, to see if against a team like KSV, where they have not 1, but 2 strong junglers, in my opinion, that they can pull out. I'm wondering if they'll play Blossom or if they'll return to Blank. I'd actually, even if it might mean a loss, I'd still like them to continue with Blossom. Because again, I just think he has a more aggressive style, and yes, he makes mistakes, but it's such a breath of fresh air for the team that I feel like that part is kind of invaluable. So that's what I'd want to see from that matchup. But if I know SKT, going the safest route is usually what they do, so they'll probably end up playing Blank, who has struggled this season. So,
to me, that game's just basically, I would describe the narrative for this game as a pick-me-up for KSV. This is like, cool, let's get back on the board, let's keep rolling, we've had some rough times. Okay, here's the question for you, right? If you had to theory craft, if Jin Air was able, I mean, first of all, at the moment, just to win games off Kingzone is a big deal. Never mind win the series. What would it take from Jin Air? Like, where would it come from in the game? How would they have to play to get a win off Kingzone? Let's just start with the most basic optimism.
I think Umti would have to have a really good early game. Like, he would have to manage to not get exploited by Peanut and BDD's pressure. So it would require Umti to have a really good early game, which also would require whichever mid laner is playing, I'm assuming it's going to be Grace, to have some sort of control over the push in mid. Maybe not the entire time, but at some point he will need to be pushing. And then if they can try to get a bot lane snowball going, I still think, the main issue with Jin Air is that Sohwan has improved a lot. Like, he used to be a Ribbon one trick who was super, super bad. He's improved significantly. Do I think he can stand up to Khan in a 1v1 matchup where both of them are not getting jungle attention? No. But for a moment, let's pretend that he can, because that's actually super important. That's part of the problem with going up against Kingzone, right? Is that you need to be able to have a top laner that can go up against Khan without jungle attention from either side. So we'll assume that this is going to be Sohwan's like career performance, right?
Yes.
And then if Jin Air do manage to attack bot side and get Teddy ahead, they can maybe employ some sort of fast push style around like what we saw them do previously with Caitlyn, where they try to attack turrets early. Actually, a bit similar to what KT did against teams last year early, where they're drafting for pushing and they have jungle control, which there's obviously a lot of caveats, so you can see why I don't think this will happen, but that would be my blueprint for looking at how a team like Jin Air would possibly be able to defeat Kingzone.
This video was supported by Dean Tanglis, Michael Allaire, Andreas Westerlund, Alex Adams, Gman, Twch, Jerky's Minion, Anthony, TGreb, Jake Petrucci, Yordan Tsenkov, Daniel Yordanov. Want to get exclusive teasers for my upcoming work? Submit questions for me or make suggestions for my content? Become a part of the ever-growing Scrilluminati via Patreon link in the description box below.